Thank you, Jamie. I'd like to ask you, we're almost at the end of President Obama's first year, and you're a Washington insider. Could you please tell us who are the most influential figures shaping his Iran policy? Whose ears?
Well, I think unusually so, this White House has been centralizing power in the White House itself across the board, probably as much as President Kennedy or President Nixon, to really keep the decision-making, the evolution of policy, within the confines of the National Security Council and the White House itself. Partly that's a function of some very influential people around Obama, partly that's the president obviously himself. So I think first and foremost, although obviously Secretary Clinton is an influential Secretary of State, she clearly played an important role with Secretary Gates on Afghanistan. I think when it's come to the very sensitive issues that were associated with President Obama's promises and policies put forth during the campaign, they have remained largely within the White House. So I would say that unusually for this early in an administration, normally a president gets his foreign policy sea legs in a second term when he's given up on trying to get legislation passed, and foreign affairs is the area where a president has unique powers that Congress often can't affect. And so it's usually in the second term that a president really pursues this. But in this first year, I think it's clear that if you watched, let's just take the week that we've all been talking about, it was highly unusual to have a president of the United States solely and completely take over the daily commentary of an event in a foreign country. Not a matter of war and peace, but the commentary about what's going on in Iran the week of the election. And as his commentary adjusted after the 6th and the 7th day, perhaps he got it about right, but that was unusual, and I think that was indicative on this issue of how much the policy is driven by the White House, and how influential not only his advisors are, but how actually what the president decides to say each day is the policy. Because increasingly, when you're dealing with especially a revolutionary government like Iran, and you're dealing with a popular uprising, what you say each day is foreign policy. And so I think that week we saw President Obama articulating, and you didn't see comments from the Secretary of State or other assistant secretaries or special envoys or others, which would have been not unusual in past administrations. Secondly, President Obama made a point, and if there was any issue that was the issue that distinguished him from his opponent on foreign affairs, it was the issue of negotiating with adversaries, particularly Iran, because North Korea was just a less interesting subject. Everyone well understood it, but he made it clear that he was prepared to, in the campaign, meet with Ahmadinejad or whoever was the leader. I think they adjusted that wisely to be the supreme leader during the course of the campaign, but he made clear he was prepared to have a summit. But in the end, what he did is what the Democrats had been urging for some time, which was at least open the door to unconditional dialogue, to propose that Tehran and Washington sit down and begin to deal with the issues that divide us. And in order to get that done, it was decided in this administration that an outreach needed to be made to the supreme leader for the reasons that Karim has just laid out, and whether it's one or two or more letters that have been sent between President Obama and the supreme leader, that has been the channel that they hoped would lead to a full-fledged negotiation with Iran. That never happened as far as I understand it, and again, it's not impossible. There are private channels going on, and it's ended up being, over time, returned to a kind of existing situation where the Europeans and the United States at the what's called political directors level meet with an Iranian designated negotiator. And in that case, it's Mr. Bill Burns, who's probably the most experienced Foreign Service officer in the State Department. But I suspect he's operating under very, very tight instructions from the White House. And I would also hazard to guess, and Karim has also dealt with these people and may know even better than I do, that President Obama himself has the idea that if he can get a negotiation going, that if he can sit down with his adversary or through intermediaries begin a negotiation, that we're going to be better off. And I think he's basically right about that, because at a minimum, we are better off than the Bush administration, because the rest of the world now sees an America that is at least plausibly trying to negotiate with Iran prior to imposing some penalty. And I think that has made it a lot easier, not that it's been easy, but a lot easier to get support from Europeans and Russia and China and others.
I want to
for
come back
a
to that question,
response.
though. That's actually a separate question, Jamie, that I
Okay.
had for all three of you. If there is such a thing as an Obama effect,
Yeah.
and how is it affecting what's happening on the streets of Middle East, but for the purpose of our conversation, Iran. So I want to hold off on that
Okay.
part, because that's an important question. Christian, I want you to just also give us a sense of who Ahmadinejad is. I know I've watched your, I can't even call it an interview, where you're kind of wrestling to get a question out of him, and you've paraphrased yourself, answer out of him. It's your
You got
question.
the
But it was a
Answer.
question. I got a question back.
You got a
Yeah.
question back, which is his strategy
Yeah.
always in turning the tables
Well,
around.
Look, I think Karim sort of summed him up.
One word.
I wouldn't necessarily use the Divune word, but others call him a bache poru. You know, sort of like a spoiled child.
We have for the American audience, it's an equivalent of a brat.
Sort of,
yeah,
but
right.
and the reason is because he actually plays that card. He wants to be that, and I thought what was for me. I suppose I started to talk to him in 1995, right? When he first was it 95? 2005. Sorry,
2005.
when he was first elected, and I was there in Iran for the election again. It was one that took us all by surprise, and he won. And I went to the first press conference. Before he'd even won, after the first round, he held a press conference to declare that he was,
Right.
going to win the
Right.
election. In any event, we went to the press conference, and from that moment, he started the antagonism with the foreign press, and particularly with me.
Right.
There was just this idea that he and his aides were going to be tough with us.
Right.
And it was very indicative of how he has been. I didn't realize at the time, but if you look at the way he's comported himself with the international community, it's been really sort of belligerent, really sort of a ram butting heads. And I saw that from the very first moment before he was even president. When he became president and came to New York in 2005 for the UN General Assembly, I got the first interview with him. And I sat down and I asked him about certain things. And again, it was very combative, and I was very surprised. And this is when he announced Iran's nuclear ambitions, basically, and told me before he went to the UN Security Council, or was it General Assembly, and told the General Assembly. And on the one hand, it was exclusive, and it was very interesting, and but very belligerent. And again, I thought, well, but that's who he is, and that's how he's
Combative,
become,
right.
combative, and seeking not necessarily conciliation, but the opposite.
But who does he appeal to? He certainly
Well-
does not represent the Iranian society that I used to know.
Well, right, but the Iranian society that you and I used to know is
Does
not
not
the majority.
exist.
Well, it's not that it doesn't exist. It's not the majority of the Iranian society. And I still think, and this may be a controversial thing to say in this room, that, to be frank, one of the most frustrating things about what's going on right now, as a reporter who wants the truth, is to know exactly the proportion of where the sympathies lie in Iran today.
Right.
Because you can see the pictures of the Green Movement demonstrations, and you can admire their guts and their persistence and the fact that they keep coming out.
They're not going home.
They're not going home. But there is also a very large number of people who support not necessarily Ahmadinejad, but a fundamentalist, conservative, traditional way of life. Now, it's true that a lot of people are organized and brought to the pro-government rallies. It's true that the media gives a huge amount more attention to the pro-government rallies. All of that is true. But I still have a hard time actually trying to figure out exactly, where this is going and where the proportions lie. And I think that you can see that the reform leaders, whether it be Mousavi or Khatami even, they have slightly in the last week, reframed their words.
Right.
They've talked about extremists. They've talked about, they've spoken against violence in the Green Movement demonstrations by the so-called Green Movement or the radical, they're calling them radical elements. So I think all this is very, very interesting. And I don't think this situation is played out yet. I don't think that he's not, I don't think, popular
Right.
in the way that other previous leaders may have been. But he's canny, and he has, as you know, a very strong Revolutionary Guard, Basij, mosque-based support base.
Right.
And even if people are paying for votes, they're still doing
Voting.
that. What?
They're still voting.
Right. And so I think that
He has
what I'm saying is that there is a certain proportion of the Iranian population which I believe is still very traditional and very conservative, and did not like what happened on Ashura.
Right.
And neither side did, obviously, because there was violence on both sides. But the Ahmadinejad side also didn't like what had happened, and I think that was a bit of a turning point in some of the public pronunciations of the reform leaders.
Right.
But by the same token, it's very interesting what's going on in Parliament, where there's this anti-Ahmadinejad and pro, these debates which are now again being shown on television.
Right.
The Conservatives have thrown that very unpopular fundamentalist general prosecutor from Tehran, Mortazavi, out.
Right.
Ahmadinejad has given him a different position.
Right.
But there's what I find fascinating, and I don't think we get enough real understanding of it because we're not there, is the internal political debate beyond what we see on the streets.
Right.
The internal struggle for what's going on that
Right.
I cannot say I know exactly.